Hello, soul seekers. Welcome. I am one of your soul guides, Patricia Ribeiro-Wolfson.
Hello, everyone. I am your other soul guide, Linda Krause-Barnett. Welcome to our show. And today we're going to be talking about inclusion in the spiritual community.
This looks good.
It looks good. I like it.
So about 2 years ago, there was a spiritual event, and it was, I think it was like an online summit or something, and it had all these women, and it was all white women. And there was a big uproar in the community, rightfully so, that it was not representing all communities. There were no Black women. There were no other people of color. There were no Indigenous women. There was nothing. And a whole big thing, came out because of that. And I remember looking at all of this unfolding, and I had an event coming up, and I went, I need to pay attention to this. Now, I already had, people represented in my event because I have a broad circle of friends, but it really made me think, where am I not including people? And so I decided to reach out to a few friends of mine and start this conversation. And the intention was to air this conversation on my show, Activator Healing. And it didn't happen. Now, part of the reason is because it wasn't the right time for that show, and now we have Soul Seekers, which it is the right time for. And part of it, I'm a little embarrassed to say, is that I wasn't ready. I think I was scared. Not that I think. I know I was scared to put these interviews out there because I wasn't prepared for any backlash that might come or any questions that might come that I didn't feel prepared to answer. And so I kind of just left the interviews dormant for the last 2 years. And when all of this happened, all of this unrest that's happening right now, I thought, the stuff that we talked about is still applicable. And so I decided, I spoke to Linda and told her about these interviews, and we decided that the Soul Seekers TV platform is a great place for us to continue these conversations. So we invited two amazing women, the first one being Tara Marshall, and she is going to be on the show today, and then we'll be introducing her in a moment. And the second woman is Rachel Rosen, and so that will be airing on Thursday. And she is, and both of them speak to inclusion, not just in the spiritual community, but also beyond.
And now, without further ado, let's watch the interview with Tara Marshall about diversity and inclusion in the spiritual community.
Welcome, Tara.
Hi, Patricia. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. Thank you so much for being here. We are in the right time and place these days for unleashing all of those things that we have been struggling with. There's so many amazing movements happening right now. There is so much more awareness now than there's ever been. And I specifically brought Tara to come and speak to us today because of a very important aspect of this healing process for all of us. And that is my personal affinity for using spirituality and energy to heal, but there is something missing in the spiritual community, and that is some of our spiritual leaders are leaving people out. And specifically, we're talking about women of color, and I think it's really important that we start to delve into it and talk about why are these people being left out, what are these spiritual leaders saying, and how are they missing the boat here. So Tara, would you like to speak a little bit to that?
Sure. And I think, part of it, the situation that, you just highlighted is that traditionally in the, kind of new age, ascension spirituality, all of these different kind of subgroups that focus on a broader spirituality, interdimensional spirituality, have been led primarily by white women and men. And that is in itself not necessarily unusual, considering a lot of major movements in our culture are led by white men and women. And what you've kind of highlighted is that there has been a shift, and the shift really has been more of a greater awareness as women of color, men of color, people of color in general have expanded their own spirituality, their own quest for deeper truth. You have more people of color who have traditionally been in, traditional religion, institutionalized religion, leaving those communities. And I think historically that has happened later than, wider communities or white churches and so on. The exodus has happened kind of before, prior to the exodus in communities of color, largely because the church has played such a vibrant role and pivotal role in communities of color. And so this exodus has taken place a little bit later on. And as a result, a lot of the movements and the books and the courses and the publishing houses and so on do not hold a strong representation of people of color. Even as in the past, maybe decade or two, you find more people of color really resonating with ascension spirituality, resonating with law of attraction and the larger spiritual concepts. You have Michael Bernard Beckwith, one of the prime, he's really a pioneer, right? A man of color, but he's one of very few that you can immediately think of in Lee's Agape Spiritual Center out in California. But again, he was one of few that you could really identify. And as big as his platform is, still not as widely known or necessary, well, now more accessible, but that has really, for me, happened over the past few years. 20 years ago, that was not the case. And so kind of because of that staggered exodus from, organized religion as it relates to different, racial groups, you find now people of color kind of looking around and saying, okay, where are our voices? Some of what I'm reading, some of what I'm hearing, I recognize that it's truth, but the lens through which it is being delivered does not resonate as strongly. There's an aspect of how this is being spoken that does not really encapsulate my lived experience as a person of color in the Western world, particularly in the United States and Canada and the UK. And so with that, you find that kind of frustration kind of bubbling up. And you mentioned earlier that there have been a lot of calling out and calling in of white spiritual teachers who have not been really taking into account the parts of their community that are made up of people of color. And, they never had to really. And the only way to kind of be made aware, I think, was for people to say, hey, you need to take a look at what you're delivering, how you're speaking about certain spiritual concepts and how that might lend and what your branding looks like. And so that's one aspect, right? The idea of inclusion and diversity of perspective and inclusion, right? As it relates to white spiritual teachers in the spiritualist kind of community. And then the other aspect is diversity of perspectives, right? So even if we begin to be quote unquote included, and I have like my own thoughts about primacy of things. When you say included, does that mean like, oh, please let me play with you? What does that say about that? Still kind of confers this, this person owns this thing and is including me, versus what I tend to prefer kind of diversity of perspectives and elevating spiritual teachers of color, spiritual healers of color, and who deliver in, whether they lead spiritual communities, whether they are writers, authors, speakers, making sure that those voices are elevated because they are out there, but not in the same way at all. And I don't think as many people recognize, that we that we are out there. Part of that is, again, this internalization of who holds authority in this field. Right?
Yeah.
Who the teachers have always been. So when someone sees an ad come across and there's this teacher of color they don't know, they say, okay, well, that person doesn't look like or sound like or present like who I've traditionally conferred authority to in this field. And so there is almost, this subconscious block that a lot of people have, because we're not only speaking to other people of color, but we're speaking to everyone. Or truth is just as valid for everyone, just as the truths of all the white teachers and spiritual leaders to date have been, relevant. And so that is kind of what I consider myself to promote more, and I'm more passionate about, is really elevating and amplifying teachers and spiritual leaders of color, so that there are more diversity of perspectives in written work, or own books on law of attraction, or own, treatises and or own courses, or own retreat. When you look at spiritual retreats that are not Christian based, or not coming out of traditional organized religion, there are very few that are led by people of color, and even fewer by women of color, especially around topics such as ascension and working with angels and, past life work, all of these fields and sub fields that, have traditionally not had our voices speaking on and teaching on, and that's kind of behind why I really started the spiritual ascension retreats that I run.
The idea that that's really started to permeate is that it's an exclusive club, and it's an exclusive club that you can only belong to if you look like these people.
Part of that too, as I said earlier about, how we confer authority, right? And you spoke very clearly to the idea of privilege, right? There is an element of privilege that affords, and it has nothing to do even with money, right. Because Gabby Bernstein started by holding meditation circles in her house, in her living room. Right. She didn't start off with wealth, right? But the kind of doors and opportunities that were afforded, and the kind, and there is a community to it, with which she resonates strongly, and that community comes together and elevates her, and I don't see that happening as much with spiritual teachers of color, and mostly Black. I see that happening somewhat with, and I just have to pause to make sure I'm being accurate with, I was even going to say Indian, but not necessarily. Not necessarily. I mean, we had that incident, I don't remember the name of that yoga conference that,
yes.
There was this huge thing where they completely disrespected this teacher, and she had been really an elder that had come all the way from India to speak and to teach, and was completely disrespected by the people who were leading the conference. And so, I was going to narrow it down to Black, but I really, I think for a lot of people obvious people of color, there has not been that same galvanizing and elevating and resonance where people come together and elevate and amplify their teachings, a lot of which, and you mentioned, okay, different perspectives. So even with, say, something like the Akashic Records, right? So with the Akashic Records, when we extract the truth of it, it is really outside of concepts of race and so on, right? But how we access it, how we translate the experience of accessing, and how we translate the truth, or the truths, because it's going to be, or each person's truth is going to be different as it relates to what comes through the Akash, are going to be filtered through our third dimensional experience, through our culture, through our lineage, right? And it doesn't matter, some people tend to draw upon being a different race in another lifetime, but that really has nothing to do with it, because your soul chose to show up in this time and space as the person that you are, and engage with humanity as the person that you are, whether that is, someone of, Portuguese heritage, or Jamaican, Afro-Jamaican heritage, with some East Indian sprinkled in there, and, or Lebanese heritage, or so on. And the history that is encoded in ourselves, in our being. And so even as we access that, and as we teach others to do that, it is going to be influenced by that experience. And it is just as valuable and relevant coming through that way. And I have a funny story to share, kind of really to illustrate what you said about really our experiences are going to be different even when we're teaching the same spiritual concept.
Yes, yeah.
Even with organized religion, Black church and white church, totally different experience, right? Let's be real.
Yeah, and
in Costa Rica, when I was there in college, and I went to church, and I was just like, oh, this is a totally different experience, right? For the Latino church, and what that looks like, and so on. But so another kind of illustration for me was something very personal that happened to me. So anything pretty much that you pick up and read about Mount Shasta or Lemuria or City of Telos has been written by white women or white men, everything. And I know this because to prepare for my retreat, I went and I, studied up and kind of read up on a lot of that stuff. And what happened then when I visited earlier this year, and we did this meditation where we visited the City of Telos. And it was basically a journey. It was a soul journey, very shamanic in kind of the process. And what was interesting to me is it was very clear what I encountered during that experience. It was this sense of coming home. It was being greeted by people that look like me. It was engaging with ancestral spirits that looked and engaged, that resonated with me. It was engaging with Orisha that looked like me. There was very clear guidance as it related to how to serve my community. And all of this, if I were to document word for word that process, that experience, it would be very different from what you would typically read about. And what that showed me, I really kind of meditated on it. I prayed about it. I said, what made this different? And I actually hesitated to share my experience. And I don't know if you saw Black Panther, and I laugh, and when I,
yes,
when I say this, people laugh, but it was almost like that shot when in the theater when you first see Wakanda for the first time.
Yes.
It was that, oh my God, this is holy, it's so beautiful, it's amazing. And you're seeing ancestors, it was just that level of connection. And what I came to recognize is not necessarily that everything that had been written to date by white men and women were whitewashed. It was through their lens. It was through what they resonated and recognized, and how their soul was able to translate that into their current three-dimensional experience and framework. And it became, therefore, not a way to shame, like, oh, you should have spoken about, no, that's their experience, but it made it that much more important and necessary for other people of color to have similar experiences, to travel to these same places and see what it looks like, what it feels like for them, what messages they're being given for themselves, for their communities. What are they channeling, right? Because everyone has the capacity to activate that gift of channeling and of channeling light beings, right? Let's keep it. I think people are a lot easier able to channel craziness, right? But,
yeah.
And we all know, when rage takes over, when we see all these horrible things happening, I do believe on some level people are channeling lower dimensional beings, but that's a whole different conversation.
That's an interesting conversation. We'll have to do it. I like that. I like where that's going, but okay, yes. Topic.
Yeah, and so it's just beautiful. And it was really this, being able to channel angels and connect to that. And I, and it's part of this thing that I'm doing, where I really want to bring people on this journey where they can activate the ability to do that, because we all have these latent abilities, and it really is a matter of activating that and empowering people to be open to, and creating a safe space to be open to doing that. And how much more rich can the literature and, you know, other and talks and retreats and opportunities to experience, how much more rich can they be when they begin to demonstrate a diversity of perspective and experience?
That's such a beautiful thought. And I remember hearing a story by Abraham Hicks, and it was how, and I'm not sure if you listen to Abraham Hicks, but I like to listen because it keeps me like focused on the possibilities. But there was a story that was shared, and it was in terms of like what somebody asked the question, you know, how do I know that my spirit guides are with me? And the channeled information was basically, it's going to show up however you connect with it. So it's like, if you think your spirit guides are butterflies, you're going to see butterflies. If you think your spirit guides are like, you know, angels with big, gigantic wings, that may be what appears to you. Just as, you know, our messages come through in ways that we can relate to them, in ways that are significant to us in our human experience. And that's why I feel 100% like behind you, and how important it is to have all the diversity and all the voices, because there's some people who are listening to these spiritual leaders talking about their experiences, and they're like, but that's not my experience. And so what can we do in order to create that sacred space, as you referred to it?
I think firstly, set an intention to connect with other people of different backgrounds and amplify other leaders of color, other spiritual teachers and leaders of color. It's not a competition. The more voices, you know, sometimes it's really hard to find like the right book that you've been looking for in this, you know, field. And to have a more variety can only help us, can only elevate us. So really kind of setting an intention to connect with people who don't necessarily look like you. Amplify the voices of other spiritual teachers and leaders. Look for opportunities to collaborate with other spiritual teachers and leaders. And also listen. So once you've connected, listen. Because I think, and you mentioned Abraham Hicks, and I didn't really speak on it, but a part of what has been very bristling and what has also kind of pushed the envelope, leading to a lot of frustration amongst people of color in the spiritualist community, in the kind of new age community, is this concept that a lot of how things are framed from a position of privilege. And when they speak on their lived experience of not operating from a place of privilege, they're silenced, right? They're told they're not 5D. They're not having, you know, thinking from a 5-dimensional perspective. They are creating their oppression. They're creating this reality, and so on. And so it has this effect of silencing and dismissing the lived experiences of people of color. And I do believe that there is a way that you can and I see a lot of spiritual teachers, not maybe a lot, but some of us are really kind of getting to that place of like, yes, we can amplify and empower people to create a better existence for themselves while acknowledging the real lived experience that we are having. And yes, this whole set light and loving over things. Yes, we can, that love matters, and really us all coming from love is absolutely 100% true. But the getting back to that does not require dismissing the lived experiences of those who are not experiencing that right now, right? Just telling someone, I just love you, as, it does not really address the healing that needs to take place, and understand that as you're listening, it might require healing, it might require discomfort, and that doesn't make the experience any less spiritual. In fact, it makes it even more spiritual, because now on a spiritual level, you are connecting with this person, you are hearing their truth, you are honoring their lived experience, and you are journeying together so that you can get to this ideal place of fifth dimensional experience, this ideal place of where love is the overarching factor and everyone is coming from that. Because I think, I don't think people recognize how much even privilege plays a role in even, not necessarily the truth of things like the law of attraction and all of that, but how that translates. Because it doesn't make it any less true, but it's not this immediate, you just need to think differently. You know what I mean? Like, there is a process of unpacking and healing, and you know, and that's kind of one of the reasons even why, you know, psychology and neuroscience has this kind of, and that's a whole other conversation, but has this tension with spiritualism, because, you know, it kind of bypasses a lot of kind of the mental work that needs to be done, that people need to do. And a lot of that is unpacking and healing and reprogramming. And some of it is not just vibing high, you know, it's some of it really is, cannot feel good in the moment, but it's about this intention of moving toward a better outcome, collective healing, ascension for everyone. And recognizing that the process to get there may not look like, you know, what we're being fed.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. And I couldn't agree more. You know, whatever experiences that a community deals with that I can't possibly have an idea of what it is like to be raised in a community that has, you know, different expectations, or that the rules apply differently to. I don't have any way of knowing what that's like. So I agree. And it's one of the reasons why I decided to do this program, and that's to start opening up and having this conversation, talking about the ways that we can start to help each other through these processes, the process of healing as a whole, all of us, because I do believe that the end result is that we are all one, and we all want to be able to kind of be spiritual and expand together. But it's hard for us to expand together when there are people who don't see the possibility of expansion because of their circumstances in life. And you know, and I really appreciate you coming on here and talking to us about all the ways that, you know, we can start to move forward in that healing process together.
Thank you so much for having me.
You're welcome. And I know that there's some spiritual leaders that, you know, and leaders in the community for us to start opening up our minds and learning from, that I believe you wanted to elevate during our conversation. And I would love to share that with my viewers. Do you have any information with you?
I think the one that I had mentioned to you was Lisa Renee Hall has writing prompts. She really kind of breaks down in it, and because I think part of it is this process of self-inquiry, right? You know, people can tell you what you need to do from now till kingdom come. There needs to be a time where you really kind of sit with yourself and go through this process of self-inquiry, do that unpacking. And I personally really resonate with using questions as a method to kind of really work through that, and kind of open yourself up to some of the truths about what it means to, and this is for everyone, but especially for white spiritual teachers and leaders, and those who are in that kind of community who are operating from a space of privilege, to sit with kind of unpacking that, and in a kind of a safe space. And so that is, I think, a great way to do that. I know also Catrice Jackson has workshops and online courses. So She does these live workshops, and they're not for the faint of heart, but they're extremely powerful and palpable. And you will leave there changed forever, and you will be able to, it's kind of this thing of like, once you see it, you can't unsee it. Mm-hmm. And her approach really is to hold the mirror right here. And you see it, and really kind of holding accountable. So I would suggest maybe starting with Lisa Renee's work, and then moving on to Catrice's work. Because if you're not even kind of open to certain things, you might bristle at how Catrice holds you accountable. So it's really kind of starting with unpacking that truth about white privilege and how that shows up in the spiritual community, in the larger community, in our society, in all the power structures. And then step into a space where you can really be held accountable and given tools to really promote anti-racism in your own life, as well as in your community and in your workplace and wherever you are. So those are the two main ones that I wanted to share as well.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. And thank you, as I said, for being here.
Thank you so much for watching Soul Seekers TV. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit the like button so content like this could come through more and more.